Okie dokie. We are recording. This is excellent. Hello, everybody. I am the Saint of Canadian Bacon, and this is the first episode of a series that is going to revolve around Minecraft lore. And I know this is a very great intro, but this is for my first time podcasting, and this is the very first episode. Unfortunately, my computer is having difficulties and has been for the last little bit, so I'm going to be recording this on my tablet. And pardon the simps. If you don't have a good cup of coffee or cup of tea while you record or talk, then yeah, I don't know how you can do that. Okay, so let's see here. I have this crazy, frantically big drawn piece of paper with all these little points and notes and these little doodles of different Minecraft thing. And I'm not saying that the podcasts that I record are all specifically going to be about this. It's just I was thinking of something like, okay, I like to talk and I like to debate and do lots of little topics and this, and I'll probably have people recording with me very soon, friends and other, people who do podcasts. But for right now, this one's just solo, and I thought, okay, what's a nice topic that I can talk about and rant about by myself? And I love to talk. It's like one of my biggest things, I'm a super talkative person. So I thought, well, hey, Minecraft, that's a great game. People love Minecraft, all right? It's one. It is the most popular game, or I should say, the best-selling of all time. And lately, like the past year and a half, 2 years, there's been a spike of people I've noticed who've been really interested in investigating Minecraft lore, the sort of quasi, I don't know if you want to call it that, but like the quasi sort of lore where it's not exactly set in stone solid, but it's not exactly not there, Like, there's a lot of different things. Like, for example, all the overworld builds, like the pyramids, the jungle temples, shipwrecks, like all these different type of structures that you can come across, and those are just a handful of examples. They all have very things in common. They're all built for people who are 2 blocks tall, the same height as the player, to walk around and explore. They all have traps that would kill a person who is humanoid, like them, like the jungle temple having arrows, the booby trap, or the temple in the desert pyramid having TNT. And the shipwrecks, well, they're not exactly built to be protected, but the monuments definitely are. And, well, I'll get back to talking about the monuments in a bit, because that deserves its own, little side tangent. But, yeah. So there's a very popular theory, it's been peddled around by, lots of people, that there used to be an ancient race of builders, right, who lived in the overworld before you click start game. Not immediately before, most likely hundreds of years or thousands of years, or at some point they were just there. And we knew they were there because of these different things and these hints. And all the chests have human loot, like armor, food that only we can eat, saddles, other things like that, right? And tools. And they're the sort of items that you think, okay, well, only a person with the same body build, or body shape, I should put it, as the player could use these realistically. Because as far as I remember, I'm trying to think, because I play Minecraft, I'm a big Minecraft boy. There's the player, there's the piglins, and then I guess there's the Endermen, and those are the only people who can really well, no, even the Endermen are excluded because they can pick up blocks and put them down, which makes them the most important in figuring out why they have this ability. But you look at it, the two main player, like people who are not undead in the game, like the two entities, are you as the player, and piglins, who can actually like hold a tool in their hand and use armor, who aren't undead and are just a neutral sort of like semi-intelligent mob. Um, so it must have been so because I see a lot of theories saying that the uh, like I see a lot of theories saying it was the Enderman who came from the end to explore. And I feel like that is definitely possible. Like, don't get me wrong, I feel like that theory, it definitely holds up, but I don't think the Enderman could have built any of the structures, right? Um, I I definitely don't think they could have done that. And it's not like no, I'm not trying to like go on this podcast that I'm started to like debunk theories. In fact, if you want to know someone who's really, really good at doing Minecraft lore, I highly recommend Retro Gaming Now. He has an entire series called Deep Dive, where he dives deep, so to speak, into Minecraft lore, and it's really awesome. I have my own takes on certain things, but I would highly recommend that if you're interested in sort of exploring that and wanting to know more about different things. Yeah, he does a very good job. It's all very well put together, very professional. Uh, but yeah, so that definitely cements the idea that there must have been humanoid people in the overworld who had the ability to build. And so for now, the theory I'm going to go on is that they were the same race that the player belongs to. I'm not going to say they're not the player themselves. The player is gifted with these crazy abilities, right? Like, you can turn it to peaceful mode, snap your finger. So they weren't as powerful as you, the player, which makes sense since it's just the lore, is that they're a humanoid race very similar to you, hence why zombies and skeletons are the same height as the player and have like many of the similar attributes, So I do definitely think that they were very similar to the player. So that out of the way, we're moving on to the Nether. Now, there's a few different things. Recently, not exactly recently, but I would say, but definitely part of the Nether update that happened at 1.16, they added rune portals, right? At least I'm pretty sure that was a Nether update. Regardless, I digress. They added rune portals as a structure that can spawn naturally in both the overworld and the Nether. And they contain the standard stuff you'd figure: some loot, gold tools, gold blocks around it, which makes sense. The Nether and gold now have this connection ever since they added Nether gold. The ore you can mine in the Nether and get the nuggets, right? Ever since they added that, they've been really, I see the connection point. That's not really a big deal to me. But what's interesting is that when you think about it logically, the connection between the two, it must have started in the overworld with the builders, for the simple premise of it uses obsidian to go to the Nether. And obsidian is created from, lava and water. And therefore, and obviously you can't get water in the Nether, so it has to have been from the overworld. Besides the fact that, as far as we know, 100% solid, the only people who can build structures or shapes are the builders. As far as we know, I'm saying, like 100% we know they must have, because it's just so much evidence for it. I digress. And they come into the Nether, and, I have different theories. I feel like the Nether wasn't as bad when the builders came in. I don't think it was as bad. Because think about it. You have the soul sand valleys, right? And they only spawn skeletons, pretty much. I'm pretty sure ghasts can spawn there too, but for the most part, it's basically for skeletons on soul sand. Which I'll talk about soul sand at some point eventually. But so when you take a look at that, and if the theory holds, that at least the theory in my mind, my headcanon for this whole lore thing, that the ancient builders were wiped out, right, by something. Something wiped them out, and they're undead. That's the only their legacy is now they are the undead, and that's all that's left. So if you think about that, the soul sand valleys, even maybe they were there, but would not have been as dangerous. Not even close. You know, like no way. It just wouldn't hold up with the lore if humanoid skeletons spawned there before they even discovered the dimension. But something interesting when we're talking about the Nether and its importance is it is interesting to note that they must have found the Nether first before discovering the end, and I'll get to that later. But if we're taking the assumption that, like, if we're taking the player's point of view for evidence, they discover this. They discover the Nether, and they discover the end. And if you look at the loot between what's in Nether fortresses, right? Even Piglin Bastions, which I'll get to in a second, and compare it to the loot that you'd get in the end cities and end ships, it ain't even close. You go to the end cities and end ships, man, that loot is great. That's some of the best loot in the game, like enchanted diamond, an item that helps you fly, dragon heads. Like some of those items are hyper valuable and very rare. So that only just proves to me in my mind that, sorry, I just got up for a second. It proves to me in my mind that they must have visited the Nether first, which also is held up by the fact that, blaze rods, right? You need a blaze rod and an ender pearl to craft an iron ender in the first place. So there's that evidence as well. Something interesting is you notice in a lot of places, like even the end, for example, when you're looking at the loot the builders left behind, there's no netherite. And I know netherite wasn't a thing in the game when they added it, but it's interesting that in all the patches and all the whatever, they didn't add enchanted netherite as something you could find there. The only place you can find a netherite ingot or a netherite tool or anything like that is specifically in Piglin Bastions. It's the only place in the game you can find them naturally occurring, without the player having to go mine ancient debris, mine gold, and melt it all together, and then create netherite. Something also interesting is I can't exactly remember I can't remember which Minecraft developer it was, but one of them made a tweet talking about netherite and why it was called ancient debris, and they said that all the pure netherite had been mined up by the piglins because they were very greedy and they mined it all up, and it's gone. So all that's left is the debris from their escapades in mining who knows how long ago. And so that shows that the piglins have the ability to mine. But you meet the piglins today, it's kind of hard to imagine piglins mining, right? I mean, they kind of just wander around, they hunt, they sort of, if you're not wearing gold, they attack you, which doesn't sound like something that a sentient race would, think, like, oh, you don't have something shiny, okay, I'm going to come kill you. And that tells me that the piglins that the builders met were very different than the piglins that are alive today. The piglins in the Nether must have had the capacity to do certain things, right? Like, it's tough to think about, because it's hard to imagine, like, it's a very interesting take to think that there was another race of builders, the piglins in the Nether. I mean, they wouldn't have been able to do nearly close to the things that the builders in the overworld could do, just based on the way the Nether is and the certain resources it has. But you think about it and you go, okay, they can mine netherite, they have netherite, and they have bastions, right? So they have the most powerful item in the game, and they also love gold, the other item that you need to combine with netherite to make it, netherite needs gold. Now, I don't know if pure netherite needs gold or not, because it's not in the game, there's no way to tell, but I digress. So you look at it like they have these bastions, and something I found myself asking when I was, sort of piecing together some lore ideas is okay, well, did they build them? If they had the ability to mine stuff, did they also have the ability to build it? And it's a tough question, because I feel like a lot of the blocks that are in it, you need like a furnace to smelt, because there's a lot of like blackstone bricks and things like that, which it's kind of hard. I'm trying to think. I mean, I like the theory that they did, because something interesting is that I haven't done a Nether playthrough in a while. When 1.16 came out, I did. I hadn't played Minecraft in a while. I'll be honest. The Nether update really is what got me interested. Because I remember the old days of Minecraft. Sorry, here's an old tangent. And how they're gonna have like pigmen instead of like villagers and stuff, right? And how that was an idea, and how they even talked about having like not a sky dimension, but like another. I can't remember if it was a sky dimension, but they had this idea of like having like this crazy land with mountains, dragons, and pigmen villagers who would use rubies to trade. And still to this day, I think that's the coolest thing. I love the idea of that. It sounds so cool and so fantasy style with a Minecraft twist. But I digress. But because Blackstone can be used just like cobblestone in the skill tree, if you will, of building things, that explains a few things. So you think of what the piglins can mine, what the piglins can do, right? You have a smithing table. Now, a smithing table is what you need to make stuff into netherite. With the gold and the nether scrap. And so you look at it and you think, okay, well, to make a smithing table in the first place, you need iron ingots, right? Not exactly something very common in the nether. I don't actually think it occurs naturally at all. And besides, I know you can spawn as loot, but if you're thinking pre-contact from the builders, is that really something realistic? But besides that, I'll get to that in a second. They could use Blackstone to build furnaces. They have plenty of wood around, plenty of things to use for fuel. So, they do that. And then they could build these big bastions by exploring and doing things like that. This ancient race of piglins, if you will. Not the ones we see today, but an ancient race of them. Who were smart enough to mine gold and netherite. Now, it's interesting because they must have known netherite was valuable. But it's interesting is you don't see any piglins today wearing it, which means I'm not sure if that means that, like, maybe they just traded netherite, maybe they just held on to it, maybe they're Minecraft's pulling some inspiration from the idea of dwarves, right? In a lot of fantasy things, even like you think like Tolkien style, right? Dwarves where they dug too deep in a certain way, if you will, which is it's a funny classic saying. But the idea that they're not exactly mining to just make tools for themselves and survive and be strongest, but they're just mining for the sake of mining. We know that the piglins today, in their current form, still have an affinity for things that are shiny and gold, right? So maybe they were just drawn to mining. I digress. They have these bastions, and it is within the realm of possibility that they could have built it themselves, because of the fact that you can 100% make furnaces and make other cobblestone tools, right? So we know they have the ability to do so, or they at one point could have had the ability, and it wouldn't be too far-fetched that they built their bastions. They built their, the treasure room bastions. They built like the stables, and they built all these different ones for utility, and they built bridge to connect, and who knows what they could have been connected to. And we know that at one point, we know they weren't always broken apart because of the achievement, those were the days when you first discover a bastion, which implies, like those were the days, like at one point it was great, man, those were the days. And also, in the game, if you do like, for example, if you have cheats on or creative mode, you can use the command /locate to find structures in the game. And you can do, in the name of the structures for bastions are bastion remnants. So they are remnants of what once was. Because it seems that something happened to the piglins, and at this point, they don't have the capacity to think, like, the same way. Like, they live in the remnants, and they live in these big bastions that are falling apart. Sure, they're still there, but they have no netherite. I mean, I'm not sure if they ever did, but the point still stands. They don't pick up any blocks or put them down like the Endermen. And you never see them wielding a pickaxe breaking anything. It's always like a sword. It's always a sword, a crossbow, or with piglin brutes, an axe. And it's always stuff that revolves around gold. Which doesn't make them the hardest to kill, but I will say piglin brutes are a force to be reckoned with. I remember playing with a friend on a world, and those guys are strong. I'm not sure what makes piglin brutes different from the normal piglins. It might have been piglin brutes were there to guard the wealth and to guard the bastions. And so whatever descendants they came from would have had to been stronger and have to have been better trained. So I'm sure there's some, explanations in that. But you think about all these different things, and I wonder, so the builders come in, they find the nether, right? It's great. It's wonderful. It's probably not as bad as when we find it now, based on the skeletons, Soul Sand Valleys, some of the other things. But, it's still the nether. They find they can't put any water down, and, obviously this causes trouble. And they discover the piglins, a sentient race sort of similar to their own, except where the builders like to go build big things and explore, the piglins are more interested in mining and building bastions to hold their wealth and to hold their food, right? And I believe some trading happened. I believe that at first there was peace between the piglins and the builders. I think there was a peaceful period between the two, and here's why. When you look at, there's a few examples. The first one is the weakest point, but you look in Piglin Bastion, a lot of the loot has to have come from the overworld, right? That goes without saying. You look at certain types of arrows, you look at like iron, diamond, stuff like that. We know that doesn't occur naturally, so the builders must have put it there or traded with the piglins. But that's the weakest point, because it is possible that because using that logic, you could also argue that the builders made the bastions, and then the piglins secondarily came into existence, whether they were created by the builders, they were an accident, or they just lived somewhere else. But the next point is that I find that's stronger is when you look at what the piglins actually trade you, like what they consider valuable for trading with gold, they trade many items that would be helpful to someone, like the player. They give you ender pearls, knowing that you can, maybe whether they know or not, but you can use them to throw, to teleport, to get out of sticky situations. They also give you fire resistance potions, something that would be very handy if, for instance, you were a builder coming over, and wanted to be fire resistant. However, the interesting thing about that is you can't, as far as my knowledge is, there's no way to naturally get bottles in the nether, like from sand. I don't think, because as far as I'm aware, there's no naturally occurring source of sand in the nether that I can think of off the top of my head right now. So that means they must have traded with the builders. But even more rare, well, not rare, but even more importantly, you can also get bottles of water from piglins from trading. So we know 100%, hey, you can't get water in the nether, so it must have 100% come from the overworld, from builders. So my theory, sort of like that I'm piecing together here, the builders came over, they were nice and they played nice with the piglins for a while, but I feel at some point something went awry and there was fights between the two of them. For what? I don't know. Maybe, who knows? Maybe the builders wanted pure netherite. We'll never know what happened to the pure netherite, as it doesn't exist anywhere in the Minecraft world currently. So who knows? Maybe the piglins destroyed all of it, so the builders couldn't have it. Maybe it was lost in a big battle. We'll never know, unless they add something in the game, but I doubt that. So the reason I think that there must have been a fight between the player and the piglins is it's quite simple. I went and did some investigating in the game, and I found if you put a villager in with a piglin in the nether, they don't attack it. Not at all. They don't even, nothing. They don't attack it, even though the villager's clearly not wearing any gold. It's clearly humanoid, but no, they do nothing. They just completely ignore it. However, an iron golem will still go its way to kill a piglin. And I personally believe iron golems were created, at least lore-wise. I know they spawn, but I believe they are created by the ancient builders. Maybe to protect certain things. Maybe the builders and the villagers were alive at the same time. Who knows? I'll get to that at some point eventually too. Maybe not in this podcast episode because, the majority of this has just been talking about the Nether because there's a lot of different stuff to cover. I digress. Anyways, they ignore the villagers, but they 100% go for the player. The second they just see the player, even these versions of piglins, which aren't even the ancient ones, they have an instinct to attack. It's only when you wear gold, showing that you're like them, will they leave you alone. And it's a very interesting point. If the builders didn't like the piglins, and if we're going, and there's to split here, I've noticed in some people, because some people think the overworld itself has like an airborne disease or an airborne something, and it turns piglins into, zombie piglins, and then hoglins into zoglins, and you get the idea. Other people think it's just a property of being outside the dimension themselves, because if you take a piglin or hoglin to the end, they turn, which means two things. If the theory of it's an airborne virus is true, then it's also in the end, right? If it's just if they're anywhere out of their dimension or out of a certain, I guess you can't say certain temperature, because I'm sure if you went to creative mode and you can put ice in the Nether, and it's not like if they stand on ice they shiver and turn into zombies. But who knows? You can make the argument that it's just if they're out of the dimension, then it happens. But I digress. I love saying that. If you can't tell, I digress. It makes me sound all smart and sophisticated. But if you were a race of builders who were fighting with piglins, and there was a possibility, who knows, maybe at this point back in the past there was no zombie virus, so piglins could travel to the overworld. Then you'd think, okay, well, maybe the villages weren't always inhabited by villagers. Who knows? But the point is, they built iron golems, and iron golems go into attack mode. They'll attack piglins, even though they have no interest in hurting villagers, which is very odd. And they'll also attack zombie pigmen, or piglins, whatever. Zombie pigmen, you know what I mean. Even though they're completely neutral and do not ever attack villagers. I can't, you know what I mean? Like, they're like basically, because villagers never can attack something or give it damage, therefore a zombie piglin, as far as my knowledge goes, cannot attack them. Same for the normal piglins, since they just ignore them. The iron golems are still programmed to attack. And that on top of the fact that when these piglins that you see today, which are a lot dumber than their previous selves would have been, they still attack when they see the general shape of the player. They still go straight to attack unless you're wearing gold like they are. Then they stop. Ooh, shiny, and they won't attack. So I always thought that was interesting. Another note is that skeletons, strays, zombies, drowned, husks. I also did some stuff in creative mode, seeing what they do. Like maybe they'd attack piglins. No, they don't. They completely ignore piglins as well. Very interesting note that the undead mobs will only attack the player or the villagers, but they have no interest in attacking piglins. I'm not sure what that's about. Who knows? Maybe piglins can't. Maybe piglins are immune to being turned by being attacked like that. And so zombies and skeletons and other things just don't bother attacking them because they're just so different. And they might just see them as like another animal because they're a lot dumber than the player. That could be it, And because piglins are also less intelligent than villagers. And I'd only say this because villagers, you can grow their skill tree of like, sort of, not skill tree, it's a bad word. That's a bad example. But you can level them up, basically, right? And more experience, more trading, unlocks more things they can do. And the villagers have a whole social community, like there's villager gossip where they talk and they rate you based on how you treat them. Like, there's a whole system to it. And they live in up-to-date, nice-looking villages. I'm not suggesting villagers built them. It's most likely that the ancient builders built the villages that they live in and the iron golems, and the villagers just happen to inhabit it. But they're a lot more sophisticated than the piglins. And maybe because of that, it triggers something in the undead, like, oh, it's to a certain degree of intelligence, and they're a lot humanoid looking, like they look a lot closer to the player than they do to piglins, will attack. That could be why they ignore the piglins. Maybe they know the piglins aren't as intelligent, and they're a lot more just like something like the Endermen, where they're neutral, or, you know, who knows. But they don't attack piglins. It's something very interesting, even though they're undead. So that's why I think the builders had some peace with the piglins for a bit, played nice, traded to see what they can get. Then they realized the hordes of wealth inside the bastions. They decided to attack, win the fight, knowing that the piglins merely had gold, and they, at this point, had access to diamond, because you can find diamond in the nether fortresses, which tells me that the builders already had access to diamond. And even though you can water bucket lava, an obsidian frame, you know, I'm looking at you, Minecraft speedrunners, you still need a diamond pick to actually mine and acquire the obsidian to build the frame. And since the rune portals are high up in the overworld, there's credence to that. But something interesting to note, when you look at runed portals, what spawns around them is bricks from the nether. Think about that for a second. It's almost like a small growth of the nether is appearing in the overworld. Maybe there's some lore to that. I just think that's a very interesting point. I just realized is that, because that's a weird thing for the builders to do. And I know there's some aesthetic, but they literally put lava blocks and magma blocks in this little radius around the nether portal in the overworld. So that tells me that it's such a random, archaic sort of like look that it tells me a few things. That either means that the nether spreads like a growth maybe, or did at some point around it, or the builders put that purely for aesthetic, and who knows, maybe to keep piglins away. If there's a lot of magma blocks, which piglins, today at least, we know the path find around it, and there's lava blocks, maybe it was seen as like a temporary trap to stop them from coming to the overworld pre-zombification days, right? You know? Who knows, actually, maybe. That'll be an interesting theory. This just popped in my head. Maybe when piglins first came to the nether, or maybe at some point there was fighting, and a first couple hundred piglins or whatever came to the overworld, maybe the overworld itself has the properties to turn them in to zombies, and so maybe the first piglins came over, it turned into zombies, and the builders realized this and went, huh, interesting. You know, and maybe that's how the virus, if you want to call it that, spread. It was an accident. Maybe there's always been some type of feature in the piglins that would turn them zombified, but obviously it doesn't activate because they've stayed in their home dimension. Once they left their dimension, it activated, turned them in, and maybe that's what actually brought the virus, disease, plague, whatever you want to call it, into the overworld, which, you know, slowly wiped out the builders. We'll never know if zombie piglins have the same ability to turn mobs that zombies do. I mean, I know they don't, like in-game, but lore-wise we'll never know because they're neutral. And the only mob that can get zombified are other piglins, which they don't attack, or villagers. So, you know, you can test with undead mobs like zombies. That's easy. You know, they go right to the villagers, attack them, and I can't remember if it's like a 1 in 5 chance or something, but there's a certain % chance that they turn into a zombie villager, I should say. I still think it's interesting that there's no way to cure zombie piglins, but there is a way to cure villagers via weakness potion and golden apple. It's very interesting to me. So that could be the possible like cause of where the zombie plague sort of came from, this zombification event that it made them go extinct. And who knows if it was actually that made them go extinct. It, you know, the builders might have been fighting with the undead for a couple hundred years before finally dying out because it was just so dangerous. I mean, think of Minecraft hardcore mode. Think of that for a second. Imagine that, but for everybody, all the ancient builders. They clearly didn't have the ability to respawn like the player. We only get it because we are the player. We are above it. were sort of unnatural to the world in a way, right? But the builders, they were always on hardcore mode, right? So you think of them dying, that's it. So maybe after a couple centuries, or maybe decades, but who knows? It might not have been an instantaneous, all builders suddenly just pop were zombies because it spread in the air. That could just give credence to certain things, like maybe the piglins came over, turned into zombie pigmen. Builders still attacked them because they were, not sure, right? They look weird and zombified, but they're still piglins wielding gold swords, so they attack naturally. Or maybe they see their iron golems still go over to attack because the iron golems, maybe in their programming, also don't know the difference because they've never seen one before and go to attack. And out of their way, the first zombies start to spread. Because the nether portals everywhere, a launched attack from the piglins goes awry when zombie piglins appear, but by this point it's too late. Even after killing all the zombie piglins in the overworld, and who knows, maybe there was a couple waves of them, because maybe not all the piglins knew that it spread. And eventually at some point the piglins stopped wanting to come to the overworld because they realized that they physically couldn't. And then at this point the zombie plague started, where many mobs turn undead. And we know environments shape the mobs. So maybe at one point the beautiful seas that the ancient builders could so easily traverse to build their monuments, their ships, to hide their buried treasure with the heart of the sea and the conduits, which there's lore there itself, I believe, but again, for another time. It's possible that throughout doing all of this, since, like I was saying, the environment shapes mobs. Look at Drowned. Drowned were clearly just normal zombies at one point, and judging on the things they have, like tridents, fishing rods, different things like that, it's clear that there most likely were zombies. There was coastal towns in Minecraft at some point, or just sailors, and they eventually got zombified. And then from, being exposed to the water to so long, they just became the drowned and had the ability to swim and wield tridents and other type of abilities that we know normal zombies can't do. And so, same with husks, strays, all these different environments actually create new mobs. So we know different temperatures, different environments, different things. They do take a base mob and can turn it, which I think is interesting in Minecraft. And not too many people talk about it because it just feels like they're part of the game, but they all derive from the same thing. They all still look like the player, and they're still all basically the exact same thing, just with some slightly different behaviors and slightly different texture changes. So that could be a possible origin of where this disease came from. This could explain a few things. That, zombie piglins or normal piglins have always had the ability to turn into the undead. Maybe it's just part of their physiology. Same with hoglins, which also originate in the nether, it seems. Perhaps. Either way, we know the hoglins and piglins are sort of related. They're the closest, pig-like things. They're the only two pig-like things in the nether that you'll find. And, they're the only two pig-like things. And they both zombify. And here's something interesting. I didn't think about this. Zombie pigmen, we know, they don't attack, right? But zoglins are the exact opposite, where piglins that normally would attack, at least in today's Minecraft, piglins that normally would attack, right? They just, become these neutral zombie piglins. Hoglins, which are already sort of aggressive, turn into zoglins, which are hyper aggressive. They attack everything, basically. Everything. And so it's possible that some of those attacked certain players and attacked things and spread the zombie virus as well. So this, who knows? Maybe that happened as well. Maybe piglins brought some hoglins over. We'll never know. But something like that happened, and that started the event that spread this zombification plague across the overworld. And over maybe a couple years, couple decades, all these builders, they eventually started dying out. As good as a hardcore player as you are, as we all know, sometimes it takes something as simple as a zombie killing you to end your career, right? And so then it's over for you. No matter how many years you live playing Minecraft, how many years, eventually all the builders were wiped out. That's why I don't think it was one immediate point that killed all of them, because you look at strongholds and it's called a stronghold. The name quite literally implies it's a stronghold. And there's jail cells in the strongholds, which to me says that perhaps if they suspected that one of their fellow builders was infected with this plague, so to speak, they would put them in the holding cell where they couldn't hold anybody. And I think that's a very interesting sort of point, because I've always wondered like what the stronghold prisons were for. And I think that's probably what they would be for, putting people who were infected by it and were going to turn. Anyway, so that covers the Nether, and then, something happened in the Nether at some point. I think after the big battle happened, or the zombification event happened, or whatever, that's where you get the skeleton spawning in the Soul Sand Valleys. And Soul Sand itself is very interesting, since, Nether wart grows on it, and Nether wart directly powers potions, therefore, whatever's in the Soul Sand must also be magical and have properties. Same reason you run on it, and soul speed, right? You run on it and the texture flops up of a little blue soul. You also need soul sand to create the wither. Like, clearly soul sand is also important, and it most likely came from the builders. And also I give credence to the idea that the builders didn't get wiped out immediately, but the undead were still around. We know that could be a thing, because on rare occurring I'm pretty sure it's red sandstone. Yeah, so naturally occurring like cut red sandstone, or chiseled red sandstone. That's it. You can see hieroglyphs of the wither's outline, which means the builders must have built it, killed one, and survived. Right? Lots of people use the creation of the wither as the fact that spread the disease, turning into the zombies and all that. But the problem is the wither is just not like, a game changer. But the idea of a couple mobs coming over and fundamentally changing the overworld permanently by spreading some sort of plague or something that's just now part of the world, and these like legions of undead, it's a lot more, it makes a lot more sense. You also think of the fact that there's rune portals everywhere, right? So at many different points around the overworld, piglins would have come in for an attack all across the overworld, and all would have turned into zombies, spreading the plague further. So it makes sense. But the wither, we know they must have survived the battle because it's on their hieroglyphs. So they must have built the wither at some point and then killed it and survived. And if they built the wither, that means wither skeletons must have come before the wither and come before the builders were completely extinct. It wasn't after. So we know the wither skeletons didn't come from, didn't come from the builders, or didn't come from whatever. We know that they must have been around beforehand, which is interesting. Who knows? Maybe the wither skeletons, and also, as far as I know, piglins do immediately attack wither skeletons on sight. They see them immediately as an enemy. However, zombie piglins don't. And, that's most likely because they're both undead mobs, but it's still interesting that the piglins will only really immediately attack hoglins for food, the player, because they're, a part of the ancient builder race, and wither skeletons, which means there might have actually been two sentient forces at some point in the Nether, or maybe there was just some big brutish humanoid-looking species, but regardless, they ended up getting wiped out. It is possible that whatever happened to the overworld Nether thing might have had like a backwards exchange, where the piglins who can't turn in the Nether didn't turn, but whatever other species there was in the Nether did turn. That's just a side note. I'm not going too deep into that, but yeah. It's just interesting to note that I don't think the wither was the climactic effect, or rather the last thing that sort of affected everything and wiped them all out. I don't like that theory, because withers aren't that catastrophic. Even the Ender Dragon isn't that catastrophic. It's a final boss, sure, but it's not so deadly that it destroys islands and destroys everything, But it is still strong, don't get me wrong. But it's clear the builders built the Wither with soul sand, which I believe must have came. So soul sand was most likely either naturally occurring in the Nether, which I totally believe. I think soul sand naturally just occurred there, but there was no skeleton spawning before the zombification event. And then they found Wither skeletons from wherever they came from, and I'm sure I'll come up with a theory in that for the future. And they built the Wither, killed it, survived, knew not to build it again, and I digress. So they built that. But I do like the idea that the strongholds were quite literally strongholds, where they were like the last remnants of people surviving. That and, it's something that's interesting too. This just popped my head. I kind of thought of the idea of villagers being the descendants of ancient builders. Like, the ancient builders who didn't die out eventually just just lived low, lived simple farming lifestyles where they'd go in their beds quickly to sleep to skip the night as fast as they could, right? And have their iron golems to protect them. And they just didn't go out, they didn't build, they didn't interact with the Nether, they just stopped and they lived as simple farmers and simple people. And through eons, they eventually turned into the villagers, right? That's a theory I thought about because the villagers live in villages. They clearly didn't build. But they're still smart enough to understand trades and skill trees. Oh, there I am again saying skill trees. But they still know how to use experience and how to still level up, right? And have new trades available. And they also have the Iron Golem's protection, which they don't know how to build. So it must have been built by the builders. So I thought that idea has some credence. But something interesting are the igloo structures, where you go down under the igloos. Sometimes they have the secret trap door. You go down, and there's a zombie villager and a normal one, with a sign that says vice versa, like two arrows, and there's a potion of weakness in a golden apple, and you can cure it. And that's what throws a wrench in my theory, because as far as I know, the only mobs that have the ability to move and put down blocks, all three of them would be the Endermen, the Ancient Builders, and the Ancient Piglins, in my theory. And now, we know the Piglins couldn't have done it. They turned into zombies, like within 15 seconds after being exposed to the overworld. So it wasn't them. And something to note, this is a side thing that's popped in my head, an argument against the zombie plague started in the overworld and wasn't brought from the Piglins, because, Piglins turned when they brought them to the overworld. So why couldn't the Wither being created start the disease? They killed it, but by this point it's too late and the disease was spreading. The reason for that theory, my idea that it's just the overworld innately messes with the physiology of Piglins, and they always have had the ability, or maybe it's something in their genes, without getting too sciencey, because there's not that much, there's no evidence of stuff like that in Minecraft. But something in their blood, something in them turns, is because of the fact of this. If you push a Piglin through a portal, and it's in the overworld, as long as it's before the 15-second mark where they turn, if you push it back into the Nether, they'll be absolutely fine. They won't turn, they won't whatever from the exposure to the virus or disease or plague, whatever. They just are fine. Which tells me that it's a property about the overworld itself as a dimension messing with the Piglins, and not an airborne thing. Because if you pushed them back and they still shook and turned, I'd be like, oh, hey, that makes sense. That it's okay. Once they've been exposed, it's too late. But you push them back and they stay the same, which tells me it's just an innate property of the overworld, if you will. But either way, I guess I should stop there. We're not exactly at the hour mark, but I should probably get my notes together and make a little more formal argument. But I guess this episode's been mainly talking about the Nether and sort of the start of this podcast. I go by the Saint of Canadian Bacon, for anyone wondering, whether that's on different social media things. It's always like the Saint of Canadian Bacon or the Bacon Saint and things like that. And I have a friend who will be joining me on most of the future podcasts, but for this episode, I'm just randomly recording this on a Sunday, during the middle of the day, because I have nothing better to do. I just got my second vaccine shot the other day, so I'm sort of just, laying low, chilling. talking about Minecraft lore into my tablet. But yeah, if you heard this and you liked it, that's epic. Give it a like. Subscribe to the new YouTube channel I'll be creating where I'll be uploading my podcasts. Yeah, there'll be a lot more rhyme and reason to it eventually. When I get my laptop working, I'll mix in some nice, cool Minecraft music in the background. There'll be a lot more people debating and talking on these topics, and it won't always be Minecraft lore. I think I'll want to be doing some reviews of shows, movies, maybe talk about science and stuff, but it'll probably be mainly revolving around gaming and sciencey stuff because, I'm a nerd. Those are the things I like. I like science and I like video games. So it'll most likely be one of the two of those. Occasionally, I may review a show I like and some movie theories and other just fun little things, just fun stuff to debate and talk and, have a nice coffee over. But yeah, if you listen to this and you're a fan of this, just know that's what to expect. I can't give a 100% upload schedule or anything right now because, I'm literally just recording this first thing as we speak in my bedroom, right? Just chilling with a cup of coffee at noon. So, yeah, that concludes this very first episode of my podcast, where I just frantically ranted for an hour about some loosely strewn ideas from Minecraft lore. But yeah, it'll get better in the future when when it's a lot easier for me to sort of have a better format for piecing this together, and it's not so rushed. I'll put together some loose script. I like to I like to just banter and have fun, but a few points to stay focused is something that my ADHD brain could really use for help. But anywho, that'll be it for now. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.